Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
The clock showed exactly midnight on September 30th. At this very moment, the United States government officially closed down. Partly. This meant that many parts of the federal government stopped working. It was a big event, the first time something like this had happened in nearly 7 years. Political leaders had tried very hard to stop this. Days before, important people from Congress and President Donald Trump, who is the current president of the U.S., held final meetings. They talked for hours, hoping to find an agreement on how to pay for government operations. But these last-minute talks failed. Everyone knew that big differences remained. They could not agree on the money needed to keep all government services running. This shutdown felt different from previous ones. There was a strong feeling that this time the situation was more serious and held more risk. People were worried it might be more dangerous for the country. This was because of new ideas about how the government would treat its workers. These plans were unlike anything seen before in a government shutdown. So, as the clock moved past midnight, the nation stood at a critical point. This crisis was a true test for the United States. It would show the strength of its leaders and its people. How this challenge would be solved and what changes it would bring was not clear. This moment would affect the lives of many Americans and set a new path for how the government handles big disagreements. The country had to find a way through this very important time. 2. The fight starts. The government shutdown began because two groups in Washington could not agree. The main problem was health care. Democrats and Republicans had very different ideas. Democrats wanted to help people pay for health insurance. There were special tax credits from the Affordable Care Act. These credits helped about 20 million Americans. But these credits were going to end soon, on December 31st. If they stopped, many families would have to pay much more for their health insurance. Some might even lose their insurance. So, Democrats wanted to make these tax credits last forever. They said this would cost about $350 billion over 10 years. They believed it would help nearly 4 more people get health insurance by the year 2035. Democrats also wanted to stop cuts to Medicaid. They did not want less money for important health groups like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But Republicans saw things differently. They thought the Democrats' demands were too big. Republicans had power in the government, so they thought Democrats should not ask for so much. Republicans wanted a simple bill. This bill would keep government funding at its current level until November 21st. They called this a clean funding bill. It would also add some money for security for government officials. This bill did not include the health care tax credits the Democrats wanted. Leaders from both sides met at the White House on September 29th. President Donald Trump was there. Also, important leaders like Senator John Thune, Speaker Mike Johnson, Senator Chuck Schumer, and Representative Hakeem Jeffries attended. They talked for 2 hours. But after the meeting, everyone said they still had large differences. They could not find a way to agree. Senator Schumer said something interesting after the meeting. He felt there was a disagreement between President Trump and the Republican leaders about health care. Schumer said President Trump seemed to understand people's worries about higher insurance costs more than the other Republican leaders. The Republican leaders, Schumer claimed, wanted to wait and talk about health care later. This showed a big split between the parties. The fight had clearly begun. 3. A different kind of shutdown. This government shutdown was different from any before. President Donald Trump's administration introduced a new strategy. Usually, when the government shuts down, federal workers are sent home for a temporary period. This is called a furlough. Workers typically expect to return to their jobs once funding is restored and often receive pay for the time they missed. However, this time, the White House's plan was not about temporary furloughs. Instead, the administration aimed for reduction in force, RIF. This meant permanent layoffs for some federal employees. These workers would lose their jobs for good, not just for a short time. This was a major change from past shutdowns. On September 24th, the Office of Management and Budget sent out an important memo. This memo told government agencies to get ready for these permanent layoffs. It specified rules for choosing which employees to let go. Programs were targeted if their money stopped on October 1st, if they had no other way to get funding, and if they were not consistent with the president's priorities. Russ Vought, the OMB director, explained that programs without funding and not statutorily required would stop. The administration saw this as a chance to make the federal workforce permanently smaller. This was on top of about 154,000 federal employees who had already left their jobs through buyouts earlier that year. This new plan was highly controversial and quickly drew strong criticism. Many believed it was wrong to fire workers permanently during a government funding lapse. This approach dramatically departed from historical practices. For many years, the Anti-Deficiency Act guided shutdown procedures, typically leading to temporary furloughs rather than permanent job terminations. Legal experts debated whether the administration truly had the power to make such lasting changes. They noted that using a shutdown for mass layoffs was uncharted territory that could face many legal challenges. However, recent Supreme Court decisions had seemingly opened some doors for broader presidential powers. Federal employee unions and different groups spoke out strongly against the administration's new strategy. Senator Gary Peters of Michigan warned that this plan could risk long-term harm to the nation. He argued that firing non-political, expert public workers could damage essential government services and even break up whole agencies. This shutdown, with its threat of permanent job loss, was truly a different and more serious event than any before. It marked a significant and unprecedented shift in how the government would deal with a lack of funding. 4. The country stops. The government shutdown started, and its effects were felt across the country right away. Some very important services, known as essential services, managed to keep working. For example, the military continued its operations, ensuring national defense. Law enforcement agencies, including police and border control, stayed active to keep people safe. Air traffic controllers continued to guide planes, preventing major disruptions. People still received their monthly Social Security payments, which help many retirees. Medicare benefits for healthcare also continued without interruption. Veterans still received their pensions and medical care, a relief for many families. Even the Food Assistance Program, SNAP, continued to help, though concerns about future payments arose. However, many other government services either stopped completely or faced significant delays. National parks, popular places for visitors, closed their gates. This meant families planning trips could not enter, and beautiful natural sites were empty. The Department of Health and Human Services sent almost half of its workers home. This led to problems like new patients not joining important clinical trials that research new medicines. Also, important public health information became harder to share. The Department of Labor stopped sharing key economic reports. This included the monthly employment report, which tells how many jobs were created or lost. Without this data, businesses and economists found it harder to understand the country's financial health. The Environmental Protection Agency furloughed many staff. This meant fewer inspections of factories and power plants that could pollute. Regular checks on food safety also stopped, making some people worried about their food. Small businesses found it harder to get help. The Small Business Administration stopped approving most new loans except for disaster aid. This made it tough for entrepreneurs. Bringing workers from other countries also became much more difficult. An online system for work documents was turned off. This stopped processing many essential papers, making it impossible for employers to hire skilled workers. Even though Social Security payments continued, the agency had thousands of workers sent home. This reduction in staff meant customer service suffered. It became harder for people to get help with checking records or getting new Medicare cards. Across the nation, people felt the shutdown as many parts of daily life and government support were put on hold. 5. People are worried. The government shutdown brought great worry to hundreds of thousands of federal employees and their families. Many people felt a deep fear, not just about missing work for a short time, but about losing their jobs forever. This kind of fear was new for a government shutdown. In the past, workers expected to return to their jobs and get paid for the time they missed. This time felt different and much more serious. The federal workforce was already facing challenges. Earlier in the same year, the Trump administration had offered many workers special payments to leave their jobs. Around 154,000 federal employees had accepted these buyout packages. They were scheduled to officially leave their positions on October 1, which was the very day the government shut down. This meant many experienced people had already left. making those who remained feel even more uncertain. For the workers who still had their jobs, the threat of permanent job loss, known as a reduction in force, caused a lot of anxiety. It was a heavy burden on families who relied on these jobs for their income, health insurance, and financial security. Parents worried about how they would pay bills, buy food, or send their children to school without a steady income. The start of the school year, in particular, made this stress harder for families, especially in areas like Washington, D.C., where many federal workers live. Adding to this unique stress was a new rule from the Trump administration. Furloughed employees, those sent home without pay, were allowed to use government devices. They could check their official emails. However, they were not just checking for updates about the shutdown ending. They were checking for possible termination notices, telling them their jobs were permanently gone. This was an unprecedented situation, meaning it had never happened before in a government shutdown. It created immense worry, making every email a source of potential bad news. This deeply affected the mental well-being of many. This shutdown was not just a political disagreement. For countless individuals and families, it was a direct threat to their livelihood and peace of mind. The uncertainty and fear made it a truly difficult time for federal employees across the country. 6. The money problem. The government shutdown also created big money problems for the country. Experts looked at how much money the country would lose. Deutsche Bank economists said that if 800,000 federal workers were sent home, the country's economic growth would drop. For every week the shutdown continued, the economy could lose 0.1 to 0.2 percentage points of growth. This was on top of money problems the country already had. The economy was already struggling with a job market that was slowing down. Also, prices were going up because of new taxes on goods from other countries, put in place by the Trump administration. One big problem was for the Federal Reserve. This important group makes decisions about the country's money, like interest rates. To do their job well, they need important information about the economy. But because of the shutdown, some government offices stopped collecting this data. For example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics stopped working. This meant that reports on jobs and prices could not be released. Without this key information, it was hard for the Federal Reserve to decide what to do next. It could make their meeting on October 29 difficult and delay plans to cut interest rates. Money experts also tried to guess the total cost. Gregory Dacko, a chief economist, said that each week of the shutdown cost the United States economy about $7 billion. However, this shutdown was different. Before, workers were just sent home temporarily. This time, many faced permanent job loss. This new situation made it hard to compare with past shutdowns and predict the full money problem. Wall Street, where big money is traded, watched closely. At first, many investors did not seem too worried. The stock market, like the S&P 500, did not fall much. Some people thought the shutdown was like a bad weather day, not a long-term economic problem. But other experts were more careful. David Kelly from J.P. Morgan Asset Management said the timing was bad. He felt this shutdown was more dangerous than others before. Because of this uncertainty, some investors bought gold, which is seen as a safe investment. Government bonds also saw changes, showing people were looking for safer places to put their money. The money problem was real, and no one knew how bad it would get. 7. The political game. The government shutdown was not just about money. It was also a big political game. Both main parties, Republicans and Democrats, had their own plans and goals. In Congress, Republicans held only small majorities. In the House of Representatives, they had 219 seats, while Democrats had 212. In the Senate, Republicans had 53 seats and Democrats had 47. This meant that to pass most laws, Republicans needed help from Democrats to get 60 votes. This situation gave Democrats a lot of power. Even though they were the minority, their votes were often needed. They used this power to push for what they wanted, like extending health care help for many Americans. But this also meant taking a risk, because people might blame them for the shutdown. President Donald Trump showed he was willing to let the shutdown continue for a long time. He had been through a long shutdown before, lasting 35 days in his first term. He believed that if the shutdown lasted, the public would put pressure on the Democrats, making them change their minds. He said, "If it has to shut down, it'll have to shut down." Each side worked hard to tell their story to the public. Trump's team said the shutdown was a chance to make the government smaller and cut programs they did not like. They wanted to reduce what they saw as waste. Democrats, on the other hand, said the president was using important government services to get what he wanted. They warned that many people, especially those needing health care help, would suffer. Both parties wanted to look good and avoid being blamed for the crisis. This shutdown was different because of the threat of permanent job cuts for federal workers. This made the game much more serious for everyone. Both sides knew that the public would watch closely to see who would give in first. 8. What happens next? The government shutdown has brought a very serious time for the United States. It is more than just a temporary problem with money. This shutdown will test American democracy and how the government works for its people. There are different ways this difficult situation might end. One way is that Republicans could change their funding plan. They might agree to add some money for health care, which Democrats want. Another way is that Democrats could agree to a simple funding bill first. Then they would talk about health care later. This would let the government open again quickly. However, this shutdown is very different from ones before. President Donald Trump's administration has a new plan for permanent job losses called Reduction in Force, RIF. This means some federal workers might not get their jobs back. If these RIFs happen, it will put a lot of new pressure on both political sides to find a solution. If the shutdown continues for a long time, many people will likely get very angry. This might make one side give in. But the idea of workers losing jobs forever changes how these political games usually work. This crisis could cause lasting harm to the federal government. It might set a new rule. Future governments could use shutdowns to fire workers, not just temporarily stop their pay. This would change how budget talks happen in Washington and could make American democracy weaker. A big question remains. Is this shutdown just a short, bad time that will pass? Or is it a major change in how politics works in the United States? The future is unclear. No one knows what will happen next for the nation. The end of this crisis will likely set important new rules for how the government acts and how it works with its citizens. What do you think will happen to the federal workers who might lose their jobs permanently?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.